Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. A man I've been privileged to know and work with over many years in various facets of that war is the former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the George W. Bush Pentagon. Douglas J. Feith is his name. He has distinguished himself both in that role and in many others before and since, including today, as a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, as a man of great perspicacity, thoughtfulness, clarity of vision, and an ability to articulate that is almost unparalleled, certainly in official Washington these days. I'm privileged to call him a friend, and better yet, to have him as a guest for a full hour of a very, very important, very timely, very special conversation about what I call the Obama bomb deal. Doug Feith, welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio. Great to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
Well, you have observed, Doug, in various quarters, that the argument that we're hearing, that this deal has problems, tends to draw us into a discussion of the details. And we will spend, in the course of this hour, a fair amount of time talking about the details. But like Charles Krauthammer, I believe you've concluded that the devil is actually in the structure of the thing, for starters. Give us a sense of that assessment.
I think that the essence of this Iran deal is a problem because Iran will get relief from the economic sanctions, which means in the first year alone, around $150 billion worth of cash. And it gets this in return for some promises relating to its nuclear weapons program. And the U.S. in general has problems with Iran that span a wide area. I mean, their nuclear weapons program is clearly one major problem in our relationship with Iran, but it's not the only one. The Iranians are extremely hostile to the West. They are a revolutionary, ideological government trying to spread their Islamist revolution around the world. They are major supporters of terrorism. They support Hezbollah. They support Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas and other groups. They've been active from Argentina to Europe, throughout the Middle East and elsewhere. And they are a major threat to American friends and partners in the region, in the Persian Gulf area, Saudi Arabia, and the other Arabian Peninsula countries, and Israel. And so giving them $150 billion right away and more money down the road through the relief of sanctions, simply in return for their making some promises relating to their nuclear program, it means that they're going to be enormously strengthened in all these other problem areas. And then furthermore, the promises they're making in the nuclear area are not anywhere near as impressive as President Obama and Secretary Kerry have suggested. So that's fundamentally the problem with this deal, and I don't think you need to get into the details of the 100-plus page agreement to see that flaw in the agreement.
We will get into those details. Having said that, I just to stay at the 30,000-foot level, Doug Feith, the argument that the administration is basically making is that the possibility that this deal will work out and actually keep Iran from having nuclear weapons for a period of time, and there's a heated dispute as to how long that will be, but they're arguing it will be at least for 10 years, and throughout that period there'll be a year from a breakout and so on. And the alternative to that very, basic and perhaps even inadequate arrangement is that they will avoid a war, that we will not have that as the only real alternative. talk a little bit about your response to that contention and why the critics of this agreement are entitled actually to find in recent experience, including that you had during your time in the Pentagon as the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, an alternative in the form of what I think you've called in the Wall Street Journal coercive diplomacy.
Yes, the president has said that the alternative to his diplomatic approach to Iran, the approach that produced this deal, was war. And so he's been able to deflect a lot of criticism of the deal by saying, that the criticism may or may not be true, but the alternative is clearly worse than anything he's done because the alternative is war. And I don't think that's a correct way of seeing the situation, and I don't think he's correct in saying that the only alternative to his diplomacy was war. There are two major ways of approaching diplomacy with problem countries. One way, which I would call cooperative diplomacy, is based on the idea that we can make a deal with a basically well-intentioned other country based on a common agreement on the rules of the road. And that if you're dealing with a country that's trustworthy, if you're dealing with a country where you have some differences, but you're basically, you share principles, then you can resolve a problem in a cooperative way and expect them to comply with their arrangement, and the whole operation is cooperative. I don't think it's realistic to do that with a country like Iran that is as hostile and uncooperative as they are. But there's the alternative to that kind of cooperative diplomacy, which is the approach that the Obama administration, in fact, took toward the Iranians, and I think is naive. The alternative is not war. The alternative is what I would call coercive diplomacy, where you use diplomacy to clarify, not to seek cooperation with a hostile and uncooperative regime, but to clarify lines, where you say to a regime that you don't trust, we want to make sure that there are no misunderstandings here. If you do certain things, then we will do certain things in response. But if you do hostile things, then we will increase the pressure on you as follows. So you use diplomacy to try to shape the other country's behavior by being clear about what kinds of penalties they will face if they do dangerous and hostile and uncooperative things, or what kind of relief you can give them if they start doing things that you think are more beneficial and improve the security of the world. And that kind of diplomacy, which has nothing to do with assuming the good intentions of the other side, was an option. And we would have been much better off, if we're going to conduct diplomacy with Iran, conducting a coercive type diplomacy than this completely naive approach that President Obama and Secretary Kerry used with the Iranians.
Yeah, naive is a charitable way to describe it. Feckless and as I indicated, wholly inadequate, perhaps is a little bit more to the point. Doug Feith, we have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk a bit about that practice of coercive diplomacy during the Bush administration and its success in ending the nuclear weapons program of Libya, and more generally, the negotiation practice of this administration by contrast. Doug Feith, the author of War and Decision Inside the Pentagon at the Dawn of the War on Terrorism, and many other fine publications, right after this.